Well, it's time to build another instrument cluster. My 67 chevelle that I did on my previous videos, where I took the new model gauges and installed them into this console, got a huge response. A lot of people calling, commenting, so I'm going to do it again. I'm going to try to do a little bit better on my video part of it. I get wrapped up in these jobs sometimes and I go faster than I need to be going without doing the videoing. Because I try to do all this. I'm doing all this by myself. I'm shooting the videos, editing the videos, doing the work, run the shop, and it's hard to do it all. And I've got like 4 or 5 cars going at the same time. But that being said, I've got here's my instrument cluster. This is actually a 67 Chevelle wagon, and then I got with Classic Instruments, and they have these instruments that have the short sweep like I'm needing, and they are in the green color and script like what I'm needing. So I think it's going to be a really nice look with these. I was able to order them without the lenses and the bezels, so that helps me to not have to remove that bezel. That's a little ornery to do. It kind of scratches up the outer side of it. I'm always worried about breaking it. So they send them to me like this. I'm going to also put an LS motor in this Chevelle. So I went and had my gauges ordered, set up for that. I got a 12 millimeter water temp sender, and then they've got a 16 millimeter oil sender that'll screw right into that motor. Then I'm going to reveal the window. Now the last one I did, I had a little bit of arc on top of them, which was a real nice look, but I'm trying to come up with a way to make it a rectangular window for each gauge. But you can see what's happening. It's kind of revealing the edges of my gauge. So if I can come up with a pretty cool way to hide this somehow back in there, I would love to do little rectangular windows to give it the same look as these rectangular windows. I'll order a new lens and get rid of this hole right here, and then a little gauge, and I'll have to put a high beam in there somewhere. So this is going to kind of evolve and change as I go along. I'll try to do my best to keep these videos updated and current, and let's get at it and see what we can do with it. Okay, I've got my cluster tore apart, pulled this off, pulled the glass out. I kind of took my gauges and I've set them up. I usually put my fuel and bolts on the left hand side and my oil and water on the right hand side, because it seems like you have a tendency to be looking over there to the right a little more than the left. And I like my oil pressure. It really don't matter about the oil or the water. Probably usually put the water temp right on beside the speedometer, and then the oil pressure right beside it, so that you can just constantly see it really close there. And then I'm trying to mock them up where they're going to go. So right here, I'm having a little issue with clearance on my tunnel for my light for the turn signal. Turn signal actually has a bulb that's mounted in the back, goes down a little tube, and then comes out down here. So I've had to whittle off a little bit on each side of my gauges to get them as close as possible, and then I've had to cut a little bit off the bottom to get it fit as tight as possible. Now with these nice brand new gauges, it's hard to do all this and keep them in mint condition, because they've got to be flawless time you get done. No scratches. You can't touch that needle. You have to really be careful with it. But it's looking like it's going to fit in right there. So once I got them as close as possible, I took and transferred that over to, well, before I did that, I actually made me a little window on what I'm going to try to reveal. So what I'm going to see, and I tried to make it rectangular to match the rectangular spot here. So I got that done, and then I laid these on this panel here, marked it, and then drew it out and drilled those little holes right there. And those holes have to be exact, because I'm going to use the radius of the corner of the hole to be the radius in my corners right here. So I tried to pick a hole size that was about the same size as that radius, and got that in place, then marked it out, and I went ahead and drilled both of them. I drilled both of them when I did it, both sides, and then I have taken a file and filed and cut this out. Now it's taken a minute to make this, but it's got to be exactly perfect on this part of it. And then when you see, I've kind of aimed small here and got a little bit tight, so I can open that window up just a little bit more. And then once I get that just perfect, I will cut this opening out right here, and I will weld that right in place right there. And then this window will look like these windows, and it'll be a real nice factory look. So I'm fixing to work on this just a little bit more, trim it down, make it fit. I'm gonna get both these gauges and actually kind of tape them together, and then find a good location for them, and then start whittling out that window where it looks just perfect. Then I'll cut down this outside. Well, I'll see how much I can cut out here. Then I'll lay this up there and transfer that hole to the face of this, then cut this out, then tack weld that in. Okay, I showed you where I had drilled my holes and how this kind of looked when I got finished cutting the squares out. Well, I'm making the second panel, and I wanted to show you what's involved. This is kind of the most time-consuming part of it. You really need to take your time and go slow with this right here. So I had my 4 corners drilled, then so that had it looking kind of like this with that piece in there. Then I took my jigsaw here and I marked that with an ink pen, so it's a real nice fine little mark right there. And I put my magnifying glasses on and my spotlight on and really focused on it and ran right inside the inside of that mark right there, getting as close as I could get to it. Then I cut both of those out and clamped that here on the table. And now I'll put my headlight on, my magnifying glasses back on, and I'll sit here and file this right back to that line, just perfectly. When I start filing this back to that line, I have to stop before I get to that radius right there. That way this will look just like the radius, and then a straight line, then the radius. So that's why this part's so tedious. Then once I get it a nice square look to it, I've got it to a minimum on my tolerance. I will take and I've fit my gauges together, kind of tape them together so I can use them to mock it up. And I'll see what it reveals in my window, and then I will adjust accordingly so to where I can see my numbers and letters and make this thing really look nice. So I'm gonna really take some time, and you can see how nice that one's looking. Make both these just exactly alike. And then I'll trim this down, then I'll trim that down, and then I'll install them in their spot. So this is where I'm at right now, trying to make it look as factory as possible. So I'm gonna put this back in here, and I've got me a really good flat file. I had another file a minute ago, and it didn't work real well. It's gotten a little weak, and I've cleaned these out. You can take a piece of wood. I'll use this as an example. I don't think I have any wood around me, but if you take a piece of wood and you push right down those cuts right there, you can push the dirt and debris out of your file, and your file will work real nice again. A piece of plastic would work, and then that'll let it cut again. So I had to search around to get a file that will actually cut, and then I'm gonna cut these flat, try to get one wide enough to bridge that, and then come back here in these corners with this round one, and then round that radius up. So let me get back to filing here. Well, now that I've got both of my templates made, I've taped my gauges in there to the exact location where I want them, and I've marked it with a magic marker. You can see there how that's looking. And then I came back here with my cluster. I've taken my cluster all apart, and I have cut these windows, the factory windows that were in this, I have cut them out of there. Then I've located these gauges on the back side where I can still have my turn signal, and my speedometer will still fit in there, so I've had to kind of move that around. Found that best little spot there, and then trimmed this thing, laid it back up there, marked it, and I've trimmed it to where this will fit. So, and then I've rolled it a little bit, put a little arc in it, and it matches pretty nice. Now I'm gonna come in here and I'm gonna tack weld this in. I'm gonna cut and fit that other tack weld it in, and then I will index my gauges and come up with a way to make my gauge locate when it lands in there. And then we will make this fit back into the cluster, and then I'll show you how we're going to wrap the cover with this to help us. This actually has these lines, these corrugated lines stamped in here, and it'd be very hard to reproduce that. So I'm going to change the texture on it with some heat shrink vinyl, and you'll see how I do that here in just a minute. Now I'm finally making some good progress on my custom gauge cluster here. I was able to get these little windows cut out like you've seen. I cut that out, tack welded in place, tack welded in place. And on the back side, I've just tack welded me in some guides to index my gauges. And then, snap these in. Kind of see how that's going to look. Do the same on the other side. Then I'm going to get me a little, about a 3mm blue LED and put right there for my high beam. And then instead of doing a bunch of body work on all this, I've got it real nice and flat and matching this. And I do my peel and stick heat shrink bind. I get this from Heat Shield Products. I can peel and stick this on that and then heat shrink it, and it'll form to this. And then I'll cut these holes back out, and you'll see that it'll give it a real nice finished look with a little bit of grain and texture in there. And I'll put some semi-gloss on it, and it'll look real nice, and it'll cover these because I'm not going to use these anymore. I had a check engine light put in my tack that I got from Classic Instruments, and then I'll put my own high beam up here, and then I'll still use these turn signals. Alright, now I got my heat shrinking done. I trimmed that out, used my heat gun, laid that in there, trimmed it out, heat shrunk it around the corners. I trimmed that out, and I kind of rounded the corners with a little piece of sandpaper, and they're just kind of sitting there. But now you kind of see where I'm headed with it. Now from here, I'll get me a little LED light, and I'll mount my little LED light right in here, a little blue one for my dimmer. And then I've got to work on these a little bit because my tunnel, I got a little tunnel here for my turn signals. I'm going to have to modify them to make them fit because of the size of that gauge. But once it's all said and done, they're all going to kind of match and be updated to a new quality gauge. Alright, I'm working on getting my gauges in place now and locked down. I got my, see if I can show you, my turn light, my high beam indicator. I don't know if you can see that in the camera, but my high beam indicator, I've drilled and put it right there, right above the 60. And then I've had to put some wedges in my bottom of my gauge cluster there to level my gauges so that they set right in there and lock in place. Then on one of my turn lights, I've had to modify it down so that it'll actually fit and clear in the window of that area. And then get this snapped in place. And then when this goes on, I've got some straps I'm going to strap in here and cut and trim and drill that, and then put that in place, and then I'll actually cover that so that the light don't come back through it, and then do the wiring. So now I've got my I'm on gauges in like that. I've got them mounted on a little cushion, took a little bracket, got a little cushion in there. I'll be able to put me some lock nuts on that to hold them in place. See how that's looking. But I'm fixing to start my wiring. So I'm going to do all my wiring and have all this completely wired up with a disconnect on it so that you can put this in the car and then plug it up, because that'll be super handy. And I'll show you that when I get done with it. But I wanted to show you a quick little trick I do. If you've been watching, we did the swap out on the 5.3 on the Street Sleeper. Well, I saved that old harness. This is the old harness that come out of it. Now I use some of the ends here and there on the truck and different places, but I usually try to save these. It looks like a bunch of mess, but there are so many different colors and variety of wire in here. So like my dash lights are usually done in white, so I pulled out this nice piece of white wire out of there. I'll be able to get a different color for my oil pressure sensor, my temp sensor, my water sensor, my volt gauge, and I'll have all those. I can have a different color for every single thing, and you can see how much wire in here. So it's just a part store of every color wire you can have. So it's good to save these and cut out of here what you need. The wires are as perfect size. There's large wires and small wires. So I'm going to put all this wiring together, and I'll show you what I can make this look like on this. Alright, now I'm wrapping up my instrument cluster. I'm waiting on a brand new lens to come in. I'll put that on there. Once I get that in, I can readjust my gauges. I've made my gauges where I can tighten this one and turn it this way, or I can tighten that one and turn it that way. I've got a little slack in there where I can turn them either way there and tighten them down. You can see how nice my wiring looks now. I was able to get a certain color wire for every single item that I have right here, and I pulled every bit of that out of here and I still have lots of different colors and stuff I can use out of this. So I'll stick this back there in the back on the shelf, and I'll reuse it later. I put me a disconnect on this where I can disconnect it. I actually had 7 wires. I only had a 6-pin connector, so I made my ground a separate disconnect, so you can actually bolt this completely in place, then unplug it, pull it out if you need to. This disconnect is heaven sent when you need it. So that's where I'm at. See how it looks. I'll end up putting a cover over this to shield it for light when the lights come on, so the light don't shine up under the dash. But that is how you install new gauges in an old instrument cluster.